On the line with us is our old friend, the Bishop Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. He's now a professor in the practice of public theology and public policy, and the founding director at the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at the Yale Divinity School. He's the president and senior lecturer at Repairers of the Breach. He's the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign and was for 29 years, until very recently, the pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Theologyandpolicy.yale.edu is the website, and you can tweet or X him at Rev Dr. Barber. Reverend Barber, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we spoke. I hope you're well and things are okay.
Well, actually, I'm doing well. I have a little gallbladder issue and I had some surgery.
Uh-oh.
So I'm actually calling you. I was just about to get discharged in a little bit, but I wanted to keep my appointment with you. I'm so thankful for what you do. And Tom, I want to invite you. We're going to do a major piece at Yale talking about media and moral issues. And next spring, what are the real moral policy issues of this presidential election year? So you're going to be getting a note from us because I want to have you come up and join some others about how do we break through, some of this madness where we get caught up in cultural wars that are nothing more than distractions, of the real issues that face the nation.
Oh man, I'd be honored. And let's speak about that. These so-called culture wars. It seems, my take on this is that much of this is being driven by right-wing and fossil fuel billionaires who basically own the politicians in the Republican Party. And they don't want us to be having a conversation about climate change. They don't want us to be having a conversation about social justice. They don't want us to be having a conversation about the way that corporations continue to, fight unionization, fight increasing the minimum wage, fight anything that's good for the average person, and particularly for poor people. So instead, they're trying to get us to fight with each other about African-American history and trans people. What say you?
I say exactly that. Cultural wars are nothing but division and distraction. And we have to not play that game and give them the fight they want. For instance, DeSantis, he goes out and he talks about banning books. Think about how foolish it is to talk about banning books that are on Google that you can get. But more importantly, some people didn't get upset until he talked about taking away a history course. Then, he actually used African Americans to do that down in Florida. What we should be doing, though, is saying, wait a minute, you're a failed governor, and we're not going to chase that issue. I've said before, we should be upset about the fact that he's not done anything to deal with the millions of poor people in his state. He's not done anything to deal with the health care needs in his state. The fact that more people died in his state, even Republicans, because of his backwards approach to the pandemic. He's not really done anything to raise living wage in his state. And we have to force that conversation because what they want is the culture war. They want us fighting trans people, fighting immigrants, fighting over history. That's why they're so giddy over those things. And what we can't do is just have marches about things like that. We have to actually change the conversation. Poverty, Tom, now is the fourth leading cause of death in America.
Wow.
Higher than homicide. It's higher than diabetes. It's higher than respiratory disease. We have a conversation about that. We know 350,000 people died during COVID because of the lack of health care. If we had expanded Medicaid expansion, probably 300,000 or more of those people would have lived. They didn't die from COVID. They died from lack of access. So poverty is a death measurement now. It equals death, and the fourth leading cause of death. And we can't continue to be a country where every night on the news you hear about homicide, you hear about other forms of death, but you don't hear anything about policy death that's being created. And these politicians, they don't want to have that conversation. We must make them have that conversation. That's why I'm pushing in Democrats and others, don't fall into the trap of just chasing the culture war. Flip the script and point out everyone, what's her name, out of South Carolina, failed governor. People say she
Nikki
led.
Haley, yeah.
She didn't lead on pulling the Confederate flag. It was Brittany Newsom that climbed the pole and took the flag down, and then she came along afterwards. But more importantly, let's look at her record on blocking living wages, fighting voting rights, denying health care. We have to, and we got to put a face on these issues. And, that's what Dr. King was and others were trying to do in the 60s. Tommy, the March on Washington was not about a person's speech. There were 1,100 cities where people were engaged in protests. There were 3 marches. There was a march in Chicago, then one in Detroit. But the actual agenda for the March on Washington, this is what we need to get back to. It wasn't even the black alone. The first thing they wanted was 75% increase in the living wage. Then the second thing they wanted was all unemployed workers, black, white, or that, to be employed in living wage jobs. Then they wanted full voting rights. They wanted to expand the Labor Standards Act. They wanted to guarantee health care. Too often we come to these moments and we don't even talk about that. I mean, even on the so-called liberal side, so we talk about the "I Have a Dream" speech, which really wasn't the title of the speech. The title of the speech was "Normalcy Never Again." And John Lewis's speech. John Lewis criticized in his speech the Kennedy administration. He said, even though we are here in Washington, hundreds of thousands of our brothers and sisters, black and white, are poor and will not be helped by the current civil rights legislation as it is. We really need to recognize nostalgia gatherings is not enough. We need to be examining where are we on the agenda that was set 60 years ago, and then force a conversation in the political space about that agenda, which would then mobilize people because, lastly, poor people represent 30% of the electorate in the country and 40% in battleground states. And there's not a state in this country where if 15% to 20% are poor and low-wealth voters who have not voted, but when they did vote, they voted progressive, were to be mobilized, could not change the outcome of the election. And if you ask them why they don't vote, our studies tell us the number one reason: nobody talks to us, nobody even calls our name.
Wow. Yeah. And day after tomorrow, Saturday, August 26th, is the 60th anniversary of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington. I see you in so many ways as the heir to his work, the man who's carrying on his work. What, in your mind, is the state of the civil rights and poor people's rights movement in the United States?
Yeah. Well, you're right. 60 years anniversary. The actual anniversary is Monday on the 28th.
Okay.
And we're having what's called She Speaks, Repairs the Breach, the League of Women Voters, Black Voters Matter, and others have come together. It's going to be online, but a massive assembly online because, women didn't get to speak. Rosa Parks didn't speak at the March on Washington. Daisy Bates didn't speak at the March on Washington. These powerful women. And so that was something that we need to correct. So on the actual date, on the 28th, we've done an online assembly. Of course, we're encouraging people to go for the mass gathering on Saturday. But what we also are saying is that when we gather, we have to remember, number one, it wasn't Dr. King's march. It was actually A. Philip Randolph's idea that he first started thinking about in the 1930s when he challenged Franklin Delano Roosevelt to do right in public policy coming out of the Great Depression. It was Bayard Rustin, who was gay, who was a tremendous labor organizer, who actually did the organizing. It was 6 organizations that came together. They called them the Big Six. Dr. King had just come out of the Birmingham campaign and it was successful. But one of the things I want people to remember, Dr. King said something that we ought to hear when we talk about the state of where we are. At the end of it, he said, go back to Alabama, go back to Mississippi. In other words, what he was saying is we have to go back and continue to build mass movement from the bottom up, because the March on Washington was not a mass gathering, it was mass protest. It was the protest movement coming to D.C., unified, and then going back and continuing to fight. And that's what we have to do, particularly at these state legislatures. Civil rights and labor rights, we're going to have to focus on these state legislatures. That's why in February of next year, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, my co-chair, Reverend Liz Steele Harris, we just had a conference called Moral Poverty Action Congress. We brought people together from all over the country and in 42 states. We're going to hold simultaneously in February mass gatherings at these state capitals, where inside of these state capitals you have people fighting living wages and fighting health care and passing all of these regressive policies. And we're going to bring at least 3,000 to 5,000 people together at every state capital simultaneously and launch a massive push towards November. And then on June 15th of next year, we're going to have a mass poor people's low-wage workers assembly mall march on Washington and to the polls, led by impacted people and clergy and others, and then use that to push for a massive turnout of poor and low-wealth people in targeted states. Because if we don't do this, if we allow these cultural wars to overshadow the real issues, then we are actually helping in the undermining of dealing with the issues that we face. Here we are, talking about the state of civil rights. The Voting Rights Act was gutted in 2013, June 25th, 2013. We've not fixed that. And even Democrats, when they have both houses and the presidents, said they did not fix the Voting Rights Act. Right. Think about that.
This is the Shelby County decision from the Supreme Court.
The Shelby County decision,
yeah.
Right.
We just have 45 seconds, by the way, Dr. Barber.
Okay, and they did not fix that. We had the possibility of passing a living wage. 2 Democrats joined 49 Republicans and said no to that. So we cannot, what we have to say is there's work still to be done, a lot of work to be done, and we cannot have merely gatherings to talk about the past. We have to fight in the present.
Yeah, and you are doing that and helping to lead that movement, and I am so grateful for it and for you and for the work that you're doing, and anything I can do to support it, feel free to call on me. I'm more than happy to be there for you. The Bishop, Bishop Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. Thank you so much for dropping by, sir, and speaking with us.
Thank you so much. Join us at Repairs of the Breach. Your listeners, go to www.breachrepairs.org and join us, sign up so you can know what's going on in the Fusion Mall movement as we face these issues. Forward together, not one step back.